Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come through and get cozy. Pick a book, your favourite book, that's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a dangerously high to-be read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they them pronouns, and I am a glass full of salt water as an act of love.
I'm Soren, I use he him pronouns, and I am a statue of St. Brendan at the foot of your bed.
We've been friends for over a decade and are always swapping books.
Each fortnight we take it in turns to recommend one another a favourite read. The first time reader tells us what they know about the book, makes some predictions about what they don't, and then we discuss our thoughts with all of you bookworms. On our shelf this month are some waterlogged books.
So today let's get to talking about
Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. So Morgan, you're kicking us off for Moist Month. With Our Wives Under the Sea.
Yes, I am.
How did you come across it?
So I believe the first time I heard about it was from someone on TikTok. I think it was Lee Reading. Their review started with, if my wife ever says she's going on a deep sea expedition, I'm running away, or something like that. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And then I saw it in my local Waterstones, and it has such a pretty cover. And I was like, I want to buy a book for serotonin, and I've heard of this book, and Lee Reading liked it, and it's got lesbians. So I'll buy it.
What more do you need?
Exactly. And then I think I read it for the first time at the Edinburgh Fringe, so I was already completely unhinged that week because I had barely slept. So I read this book and it became like my entire personality for the whole week. My friend Jithia was like, what is going on? And I was like, listen, the lesbians are experiencing sea horror. So that was how I read this book.
That's an experience.
It was a good way to read it, I think.
I read a lot of this after midnight in the bath, which I also think was probably appropriate over multiple days.
Of all the places to choose to read this book, you picked the bath?
Yes. I was enjoying myself.
I mean, good for you.
Thank you.
I love this.
Method acting? I don't think that's what it is.
You're getting into the mind of the character.
Exactly.
I love this. We'll call it method reading.
Method reading. If you're not crossing the desert when you read Dune, then you're not doing it correctly. I'm sorry.
If you're not in the middle of Hollywood when you read Evelyn Hugo, what's the point?
What's the point? And you have to have time travel back to the 50s or else there is, again, no point.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just not a real reader if you don't... I'm sorry.
Yeah, come on. You heard it here first, folks.
Anyway, what is Our Wives Under the Sea about, Morgan?
Our Wives Under the Sea is about a married lesbian couple, one of whom is a deep sea explorer. One day, the deep sea explorer goes missing whilst on a dive for 5 months. And when she comes back, she's a little bit different than she used to be. And it's all about the top if true. What if your wife just dissolves in the bath?
Would you still love me if I dissolved in the bath? A very important question, which I think should become the next TikTok trend.
Yeah. The horrors are incomprehensible. Not to me. To me, they're my wife. That's what this is about.
Shall we see what I thought it was about? So, I do not know a lot about Our Wives Under the Sea. I know that Armfield is a poet, and apparently that poetic sensibility is reflected in the prose of Our Wives Under the Sea. I know it's sapphic. I think that maybe there's something about the protagonists is, from her point of view, her wife or girlfriend went out to the water and then came back differently. I don't know if she was a sailor or in a submarine or something. I might be conflating that with a completely different story, but that's what's on my mind going in. Cover gives very little away. It's just sort of a woman whose face has been obscured by these droplets. But that does kind of make me lean into something about identity and how that can be changed. I'm expecting horror. I know this is horror, so possibly a sort of cosmic horror thing, more existential than necessarily just gore. The horrors of the vastness of the ocean rather than the horrors of a particular sea monster or something is kind of more what I'm leaning towards now. But I'm very excited to get into it. Do I have any wild predictions? Maybe there's multiple copies of the wife. You know, it is obviously going to be a wife, not a girlfriend, because it's called Our Wives Under the Sea. Well done, sorry. So, I'm assuming that when her wife returns, maybe she tries to track down her original wife and she discovers that there's a whole bunch of copies and she can't find the original. That's my wild prediction, sort of changeling thing going on there. Okay.
Well, first off, having advertised this a lot as, oh my god, Julia Armfield is a poet, and I don't actually think she is a poet.
Oh.
I think that has been false advertising on my part, because I've now read her other book as well, and I'm like, I think it's just her short storyness and her vibes and her style of writing specifically, but it feels like poet writing. That was my fault.
No worries. I think we did say that in The Watchful City, so retraction. But it does have a sort of a poetic feel to it.
Other things in your review?
Submarine, not a sailor. Existential horror. I think it was an interesting combination of claustrophobia and existential horror, which I really enjoyed.
I think it's that specific style of horror that's more metaphor. On the one hand, something is very clearly happening that is about the sea, but on the other hand, the horror is very clearly a metaphor for other psychological things.
It didn't necessarily feel like it was an allegory for something specific, which I enjoyed. I think that can work in horror, but I think when that's done really heavy-handedly, it can get quite irritating. So I liked that this was open to interpretation in lots of ways, and there were lots of things in Miri's life that you could draw parallels to, like her losing her mother, like her own health, losing someone to actual death or to trauma. The cover, she's not really obscured by droplets. I think she's actually just melting. I think I misinterpreted that.
I feel like it could be in a mirror or something like that, because some of the droplets look more like fingerprints, like she's tried to sort of get herself back. Then she's also clearly praying on the cover.
Oh, I completely missed that. So maybe it's Jelka on the cover.
Miri is Catholic, brackets lapsed.
That's a good point.
I just love this cover so much, like the green and the vibes. If you look at the US cover, I'm sorry, but the US cover is horrible. It's pink. It looks like a desert.
Yeah, I'm usually pro not having people on covers, but I think in this case, because you don't directly see her face, I think it tells you a lot more about what the book is about. The US cover really could be anything, even genre-wise, it could be anything. It just feels very generic in comparison.
I genuinely thought it was the desert. This was up for Goodreads Awards last year, and I genuinely didn't even notice because they had the US cover up there, and I just didn't recognize that they were the same book.
Yeah, even the texture of the waves seems kind of wrong to me.
Too pointy.
So Morgan, you mentioned that you also read Salt Slow.
I'm not a short story person usually. I loved this book. Talk about Our Wives in a second, but I loved Salt Slow so much. You've got a short story about a city where all of the people's sleeps become real and apart from themselves, and so they all can't sleep anymore.
Oh.
And they all start going slightly insane. You've got a story about a girl who's raised alongside a wolf. You've got a story about a all-girl band that makes all women who listen to them go insane and start killing men, basically.
It's like a lesbian Grifter's Bone.
Yeah, like lesbian Grifter's Bone. There was a lot of parallels. There's a story about a woman whose girlfriend comes back from the dead and is just hanging around rotting in her house. And she's like, I don't know how to deal with this. And it's like, interesting. Interesting.
I did get the sense reading this that it's somebody who really enjoys the came back wrong trope, which I really appreciated. Thinking about it, I feel like usually when I come upon it, it's an element of a larger fantasy story.
Yeah.
And to sort of sit with it for so long and examine it in such detail was really nice, because it is a trope that I love.
The last story in Salt Slow is actually called Salt Slow, and it's about a drowned world and a married couple who are stuck on a boat, and the woman is pregnant. She gives birth to a sea horror, which her husband casts overboard, and then it comes back and drowns the husband.
Sounds deserved. Why would you throw your little sea monster out of the boat? How could you do this?
The first story is about a girl, her skin starts peeling off, and then she becomes a praying mantis and she kills a boy at a party. You can go straight from Salt Slow to Our Wives in the creative process. They make so much sense.
Yeah, Salt Slow came out first, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. It feels like maybe Our Wives is like a distillation of the ideas that were being explored there, just from what you're saying. Obviously, I haven't read it.
It was really interesting having read Our Wives to then read Salt Slow, because the interconnectedness was very vibey. But Our Wives.
Our Wives.
My beloved.
The writing style.
Writing style.
It was very good. I really liked it. Hang on, I have things. I know that we don't usually pull out quotes. I feel like there was one early on that made me go, yeah, I'm vibing with this. The offhanded description of the look of a person who has let their gaze drop too deep and now can't seem to retrieve it. I really liked that little metaphor of it being a physically dropped item. I loved that. And I think that fit the allegorical tone of the novel very nicely. But there was also a line earlier before Leah leaves, her dress was white and clung to her like sealskin. Loving the little mythology reference there. And despite the fact that there's not outright references, I feel like you can feel the foundations of that behind this.
Definitely. The way that she writes when she does dashes and stuff like that and descriptions, when she doesn't use the definite article. Unstill is the word Leah uses, tilting her head to the side as if in answer to some sound, though the evening is quiet. Dry hum of the road outside the window. Just going straight into the description. I think that's what made me think that she was a poet, because that is a very sort of poet way of writing, because you don't have the space for those extra words.
It feels very visceral. You're just sort of there. It is kind of like if you were describing a memory and just verbatim saying whatever came into your head about a particular memory. It feels very immediate.
It feels very dreamlike in a way that I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan, if you didn't know, of dreamlike writing.
I think it works really well here, the disconnected scenes, because there's clearly a dissociation of sorts going on for both characters. So having things feel slightly unreal circles right back around to making them feel more convincing, because you would be kind of losing your mind a little bit in this situation.
Just the first line, the deep sea is a haunted house, a place in which things that ought not to exist move about in the darkness. Just sets it up so well.
That caught me completely. As soon as I read that, I was like, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to like this a lot.
The way she brings so many different things in. I'm pretty sure that Julia Armfield must have been brought up Catholic, because it's also a very, very big part of Salt Slow, and a lot of the characters are lapsed Catholic or go to Catholic school. So I feel like her Catholic upbringing and also existing as a queer woman in public, it comes across in here quite a lot, with like the little things like her introducing Leah as her girlfriend instead of her wife, because it makes people back off more.
Yeah, just the way that their dynamic gets sort of read differently. I don't think they ever explicitly say how Miri and Leah present and how that chafes with the expectations that are necessarily placed upon them. They have a very believable relationship. It's neither stereotypical or just deliberately the opposite of the stereotypes to try to make a point. They just feel like a real couple who sometimes do fall into a stereotype and sometimes don't. They were just very convincing as characters.
Her casual characterization is so good. There's a lot of side characters who feel like real people throughout the book. Incredible thing to be able to achieve.
Yeah, everyone feels incredibly rounded, and I was also impressed that we don't actually really get any real flashback scenes of Marie and Leah interacting. We get them remembering moments with each other, both Leah on the submarine and then Miri. She doesn't actually just take us back very often, if at all, actually. I think there are scenes that run longer, but they're still usually Miri just recalling an event filtered through her narrative voice, but you still get a very clear picture of what their relationship looked like. And I think an investment in them, little details like Leah being like, when I was sad, Miri would cycle my feet on the sofa and shout Tour de France repeatedly until I laughed. Very convincing couple ridiculous inside joke that is really endearing.
They're so cute.
It's in all of those little details.
Can we talk about the absolute tragedy that Leah's whole thing is like, I'm collecting all these different facts so that I can report them back to Miri. And then Miri's like, oh yeah, she's clearly in her own world. She's not talking to me when she has these like info dump sessions. And it's like, no, that is Leah trying to communicate with you now. She's saved up all these little facts to give to you. And this is the only way she knows how to communicate now. And this is her way of trying to show love. And you can't understand that because she came back wrong. And oh my god, that absolutely bodied me the first time I realised it.
It's so good. The whole concept of love being the person that you want to tell things to. There's a letter, I forget who it's by, but it was a real letter to exchange between a couple. One of them was incarcerated. Found it in the Letters of Note collection on Love by Sean Usher, which is a very interesting little series if you want to read some epistolary nonfiction. But there was a line in there along the lines of, now I do not even look at the sky. If I see a cloud, who can I tell? That thing of just love being communicating and seeing something and thinking, oh, I'm going to tell them about this later. And then that being broken and that being sort of the beginning of grief is just not being able to communicate with somebody. I love that idea and I think it was explored so well here.
Who was your favourite character?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I don't have like an immediate instinct. I really liked both the leads, but I did like Miri a lot because I feel like she could easily have been flat because she is sort of the anchor, the point of view character. I mean, obviously Leah also gets her point of view, but she's the audience surrogate in some ways because she doesn't know what's going on. She feels very three-dimensional and compelling in a way that I'm kind of struggling to articulate. And I liked the convincing progression of her from, I should probably call a doctor, to sliding glasses of salt water to Leia because she realises that they are helping her.
The scene where she gets into the bath with her, or when she brings the TV into the bathroom so they can watch TV together.
Yeah.
Oh my god. The implication that all of the bits that we get from Leah are bits that she's written down that Miri will read after, because Jelka's sister brought it.
Yeah.
Many feelings. Much ouch.
Do you have a favourite?
I think it was Miri. I think she's just so relatable to that sort of millennial Gen Z days starting to elide, not sure why you're doing things, feeling like you're asleep half the time. Also, as a hypochondriac, I feel that mood a lot. That realization she had, she always assumed something bad would happen to her. She never really realized that bad things could happen to other people as well, and that they would affect other people just as much as her.
I do love the misery of that trope. Or when it's vice versa and someone's protecting somebody else and something bad happens to them.
Yeah, I just really liked her as a narrator. I thought she had such a strong voice.
I think if you've ever watched anyone struggling with a physical illness, a mental illness, any kind of deterioration that feels so cosmic and impossible to undo, it's very relatable. And then in the acknowledgement, Armfield talked about writing, I think, during the pandemic. I don't think she specifically said writing during the pandemic, but she dedicated to someone and said the only person that I could be trapped with and still want to continue being with them. And I think there was that kind of claustrophobia in Miri. I don't know why this happened, but I kept imagining the apartment that I was in during the pandemic. You get a very literal claustrophobia from Leia's point of view because she's stuck in the submarine. But then Miri very, very rarely leaves the apartment, which starts as the claustrophobia of the whole apartment because often Leia's in the living room or in the kitchen, and then it shrinks and becomes sort of just the bedroom and the bathroom, and then just the bathroom where she's just sitting on the floor. It was that shrinking feeling that I think a lot of people can sadly relate to now.
Mm. Yeah, I do like sort of closed stage, I think I'd call it, narratives, where you're stuck in these very small spaces. You have to be quite creative in your description and dynamics in order to keep the reader engaged.
Yeah.
But it makes for such an interesting story when people get it right. I could imagine the submarine so clearly, the metal and the warmth and the denseness and the muffled quiet. I could picture it so clearly when I was reading. Poor Jelka, though.
Yeah.
My girl did not deserve any of that.
No.
She's just trying to get everybody to listen to the ghosts.
Exactly.
I did spend half this book when I first listened to it being like, I've listened to a Magnus Archives episode like this.
You know what it really reminded me of, actually, was All Through 59, weirdly. I think it was the claustrophobia existentialism thing, and then also the, came back wrong element.
You're so right. Oh my god.
Because I went in with that expectation of this not maybe being Leia at all. That was interesting. Obviously, there's those questions about what does make a person themselves, what's the fundamental delineation between a person and a clone, or a person and a copy, or a person and a robot with all of their memories, etc., etc. But we did not get a forest of wives growing under the sea or something. That was my mental image going in, just a bunch of them.
I do love that trope.
I would have loved to get some of Leia's internal experience after the submarine, but then I also wonder if it would be impossible to understand, if that makes sense. But maybe you could do something really wild with the writing style there and move into poetry or into stream of consciousness, Duck Snoopboard style one sentence or something, and just give us some weird insight into what she's experiencing. But then I do also see the point of leaving it unknown, because it is that experience of losing somebody, whether they're missing or dead or changed by mental illness or disability or whatever the thing is. You don't have that insight, you don't have that window. I
was almost disappointed that we got a reveal at the end of there being a huge horrifying thing.
Yeah, I was a little bit too. And we didn't get much detail about it, but
I wish we'd gone a bit more into depth about what it did or what it communicated after Leia gave it her name.
I think I kind of wanted less or more, if that makes sense. Either I just kind of didn't really want to know what it is that they saw and leave it as sort of the classic sort of Lovecraftian, eldritch, it is beyond comprehension thing, or seen things about it that only raise more questions. And then not being given further explanation.
I want to know more about Leia's connection to it. I want to know why she's dissolving. It's implied that it's because they were using the shower that sort of draws in water from the outside. And therefore, she says something earlier on about how there was too much water. So I took that to mean because they were using water from outside that doesn't get filtered.
I did not pick up on that, but that does make sense.
Yeah, it's very Waters of Mars. If anybody's watched Doctor Who, the Doctor Who episode Waters of Mars from 2009, the whole point of that episode is that they're on Mars and they have these water filters, but they're slightly wrong sized when they're sent in the new delivery. And so even a single drop of water now has enough to infect them all with this watery virus that makes them gush water and be kind of zombies. It very much reminded me of that.
I'm not surprised, that sounds similar.
Absolutely terrified to take a shower for months after.
Doctor Who, which has been traumatising children since, I don't know when, the 60s?
Yeah, the 60s.
Since the 60s. I think I was actually interpreting it as the weight of the water, because Mary says that thing about how surely there's too much water on top of them if they descend. That was how I was sort of reading that, because then also Leia has the brief thing where she's like, if I look into the mirror, I'm going to see someone who's been distorted by the pressure of all that water. And then she's like, oh, I look normal. But
no, yeah, I see that. And there's the whole thing of she says there are things that came out of the water, but what about things that didn't? How has that being down here changed them? And they were down there for 5 months.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a metaphor for the pressure of being alive under modern capitalism.
It reminds me of when people take deep sea creatures out of the water and are like, wow, this thing looks so stupid. And it's it's not supposed to be surviving up here, though. So I can kind of see that they had evolved in inverted commas to survive down there. And then when they got removed from that environment, which also kind of makes sense as like a trauma thing, like when people leave a high stress environment and then they're not adjusted anymore.
Yeah. And she has that line when she's like, oh yeah, my blood doesn't know how to be under this pressure anymore, so it just comes out of my skin sometimes, as you do.
I do think you have a point about the capitalism thing as well, which I think is also a bit why it reminded me of Ultra 59. The horror of things like Miri repeatedly calling the centre and being sent to voicemail, trying to engage with bureaucracy when it's a life or death situation, and you're just trying to jump through hoops and fill paperwork and talk to somebody that doesn't care about you and is reading from a script. That was interesting.
Oh boy.
I feel like I haven't really seen much of that. Again, the only example I can immediately bring to mind is bits of the Magnus archives. Like, there's that episode in season 5 where everyone is sort of queuing to get murdered. But it's the queuing aspect of it that's sticking in my head here. You've got existential horror of the ocean, which does not care about you on a personal level. And then you've got the existential horror of a corporation that does not care about you on a personal level. So it sounds bizarre, but it actually seems very logical to link those two ideas. And I feel like I'm seeing it more and more in fiction. I love it. I mean, it's deeply upsetting and horrifying, etc. But, you know?
It's the whole thing of horror reflects the fears of the culture at the time that it's being released. I watched a lot of really good videos by Kenna Rambles on TikTok about this and about how, you know, post World War II, you have a lot of came back wrong stuff and a lot of Cold War fears, a lot of zombies. Now it's a lot more existential. It's a lot more a cog in the system, and all the fears are actually just a metaphor for capitalism. And it's really interesting to see that sort of coming into effect in horror at the moment, which we do see a lot. And it's interesting and vibey and upsetting.
I think this does very much tap into like the moment in terms of horror. It feels very current.
Julia Armfield's written some non-fiction essays. There's a quote from her essay called On Body Horror and the Female Body, which is, I think that writing about women goes hand in hand with horror writing. The female body is a nexus of pain almost by design, but is also potentially monstrous, an object traditionally subjugated both for its presumed weakness and its perceived threat.
I like that. And then particularly, I think bringing that into a queer context adds another layer to it. Did we talk about the ending?
I liked it. It was upsetty spaghetti, but it was good. I liked tying in the house from her mum and the very clearly unresolved trauma there. There are so many different metaphors you could take from this.
Exactly.
But I think especially the letting go one at the end is the most literal metaphor in the book, I think, as she literally lets her go into the sea.
Yeah, I think it was well foreshadowed. From a certain point, I think you can tell that that's where it's going, but it doesn't feel predictable because it feels inevitable instead. Mary knows that, and she's also in denial about it.
I feel like as soon as Leah's eyeball falls out, if not before, you're like, yeah, she's got to go back in the sea.
Put her back. Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me.
Like, especially when Mary just sort of watches it happen and it's just stated as a fact. It's very sort of like, oh, we're on a trajectory here now.
I liked that the body horror didn't rely super hard on blood and guts and things. I liked that it was watery flavoured body horror.
Squishy.
It was still horrifying, but I just thought it was fresh. I'm sure there's lots of people that have done people, you know, turning into water, but I haven't read that much horror. So to me, this was new. So I enjoyed it.
Are you one of those people, Soren, who sees a really common trope?
Exactly.
But it's in literary fiction, so you're like, oh my god, this is the best thing I've ever seen.
Does this count as literary fiction?
I found it in the literary fiction section.
Oh, did you? Because it's not tagged as literary fiction on Goodreads.
I think it bridges the gap really interestingly because it is written like a short story, and a lot of people, specifically with sort of the style of short story that she writes, those are more often perceived as literary fiction, even if they are straight up fantasy.
Yeah.
Because they are more clearly a metaphor. So I think this sort of bridges that gap.
Yeah. Honestly, the label literary fiction kind of just annoys me because it's so meaningless.
Literary fiction is just a elitist tag that separates. It's like, oh yeah, this is genre fiction, but like, it's special.
Exactly.
So like, you know, it's just people going out of their way to not be perceived as having read science fiction and fantasy and enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's very clearly rooted in elitism.
Yeah.
I hate it so much.
It's irritating. I appreciate, maybe literary fiction gets a bit more experimental with form and divests of genre conventions, but that's, what does that mean? It's a descriptor, it's not a genre. You can't be like, this film, it's a stationary shot throughout the entire film, but it's definitely not fantasy, despite the fact that it has a dragon in it. Like, it's still also fantasy. So calling it something else seems bizarre.
Yeah, because at that point, you have to start calling the Carmilla YouTube series literary fiction. but like for TV.
And also, at the end of the day, speculative and inverted commas fiction is, the oldest kind of story we have, and I think there's a reason for that. Anyway, that was a slight tangent.
Yeah, but it's important, because we feel very strongly about it here. Soren, tell me about your thoughts of Our Wives Under the Sea.
I really liked it. I don't really know how to talk about it, if that makes sense. I know we just talked about it for like a whole episode. I don't know how to sum it up. There were just lots of things, from the prose to the characterization to the actual ideas in it to the themes being explored, that I really liked about it. And I feel like this is a 5-star read. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Would recommend losing your mind in the bath with this book.
I want to try reading it in the bath now.
Morgan, what were your final thoughts?
I loved it. She has very quickly become an instant buy for me, especially after reading Salt Slow. I will read anything that she writes. I think she's a brilliant writer. And we need more queer, vibey writers in our lives. And I love it. Soren, do you have any recommendations for people who liked this book? And if you don't say the book I'm thinking of, then I will be completely shocked.
I think it is probably the book that you're thinking of. The only thing that I could think of when I was thinking about this was Deep Lie by Frances Hardinge. It's very different, so in some ways I'm kind of hesitant, because it is YA fantasy, and it feels more in that vein than in horror. The horror is sort of incidental, if that makes sense. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, she does write horror.
Yeah, I feel like she writes YA horror, especially if you compare like Deep Light and The Lie Tree and Cuckoo Song. Cuckoo Song is very much YA horror.
And actually, Cuckoo Song is also an interesting one for this, I think, because it has that whole identity thing and some body horror from the perspective of the person that's going through it as well, which is interesting. Deep Light is about 2 orphans who scavenge for relics under the ocean, and one of them begins to transform into something strange when they find something unprecedented. And Cuckoo Song is kind of a came back wrong story. It's a historical fiction fantasy about a young girl who wakes up after an accident and discovers that she is different. Her sister's terrified of her, she's starving all the time, and she keeps waking up after sleepwalking, and it's very eerie and strange. So those, I've definitely talked about at least Deep Light before on the show, but they're very good. So that is all I will say. Morgan, do you have anything for people that enjoyed this?
Definitely read Salt Slow if you haven't already. It's incredible vibes and it leads very cleanly from one to the other. In the same week, somehow, I read The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, which is more mystery than any sort of fantasy. But it's about these 3 people who work at a lighthouse and they all go missing. It's told in 2 perspectives. One is 20 years later from the point of view of all 3 wives and them being left behind. And then one is the narrative of what actually happened from the point of view of the Lamplighters. And it sort of alternates. And it's very much like begins eliding and everyone's going a little bit insane. And there's a lot of like ruminations on the sea, which I think was very vibey. But if you're looking for fantasy, you aren't going to get it. I'm trying to think of a sapphic book because I feel like I should recommend a sapphic book.
You recommended Our Wives Under the Sea after we read Gideon, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you like Catholic-inspired horror with lots of disaster lesbians, I mean, read Gideon the Ninth.
And some existential horror as well.
Existential horror, body horror, very nicely jigsaws.
Next time, I am making Morgan read Lake Law by Anna Marie McLemore. We're doing another McLemore. It's been 1 year, so I think I'm allowed.
I mean, considering we've done 2 Tamsin Ware books in 6 months.
That's true, and I guess we've done 2 Freya Marks books.
This is also true.
I'm very excited for Morgan to read this, and I won't say anything about it, as usual.
But until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Plain Up Prod. On this episode, you heard Morgan Greensmith and Soren Briarwood discussing Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, with editing by Kit Lovick. You can find out more about this book at juliaarmfield.co.uk. You can find Armfield on Twitter at Julia Armfield. You can find The Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Plainer Prod at plainerprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com, or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or a review, or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday, the 19th of June, we'll be discussing Lake Law by Anna Marie McLemore. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase.